So, dear all, welcome to our another interlecture. That's one of our online open lectures of this fall series. This the second to last. This week we are completing this project and you will be able to get your certificates at last. Today we have with us Professor Dr. Hans Wismet, who is academic head of our Laboratory for International and Regional Economics, and who is also the president of Saxon Academy of Sciences in Leipzig, Germany. And he will talk about circular economy. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand or write the question in chat. And I will share some more information on the certificates and so on in the chat as well. So Professor Wismet, welcome. I give the floor to you.
Thanks, dear Lena. Thanks for the kind introduction. Dobedien, dear students. So unfortunately, I'm in Germany right now. I have to be in Germany. There is no way to come to Russia right now. And unfortunately, it will continue to be like this for the next half year. So Lena introduced me already. So let's start with the circular economy. And in my online lecture, I would like to make you a little bit familiar with this very interesting concept. And I would like to tell you about the origins of this concept and its relevance for our future economies. And in particular, I would like to tell you about the challenges which are associated with the implementation of a circular economy. So you may have heard about a few other concepts which are to some extent related to a circular economy. There is a smart city, of course. There is a sustainable development in particular. Corporate social responsibility is also related to that, and the green economy. These concepts, which I mentioned right now, they are linked to the circular economy via sustainability. So sustainable development is of some relevance for all of these concepts. Moreover, we have an issue of climate change mitigation, we have smart administration, we have environmental technologies, in particular also so-called DFEs, designs for environment. I will come to this later. And again, smart cities, they are also very much dependent on technologies, on ICTs, so information and communication technologies, but also on innovations. So there are very important links to many concepts with which you are probably familiar. So let me just repeat this. Circular economy extends to economics, of course, in particular environmental economics, to management. There's the issue of waste management. There is the issue of environmental technologies. There's innovation management, for example. Then there are the humanities. So we need psychology to understand some behavioral aspects. So it touches behavioral economics. This also relates to some extent to corporate social responsibility, to understand why companies are doing something good. It's very important. And then we have so-called societal path dependencies. This just means that our daily behavior is to some extent dependent on what we have done in the years and the weeks before that. And this extends also to environmental issues, for example, waste segregation and things like that. And then, of course, we need natural sciences. We need physics, chemistry, biology to tell us or to provide us with new insight on the environmental harm associated with certain processes or associated with certain products. And we need engineering, for example, for producing, for designing environmental technologies. Just one brief aspect which I would like to mention. If you think about a regular economy for a moment, then you easily understand that what I have mentioned right now, so management and relevance of natural sciences, engineering and so on, these things are also of relevance in a regular economy. So, but nobody talks about that to this extent. So the question, of course, arises, what makes a circular economy special? Why do we have to talk about it? Why does it attract so much attention? Why does it need to attract so much attention? And why can't we just sit back and wait for the circular economy to happen if it is this important? So unfortunately, it's a little bit more tricky and more difficult, and I would like to tell you about that. So in order to understand circular economy a little bit better, we should go back to what we have right now, actually what we had over the last 250, 300 years, actually more or less since the beginning of industrialization. It's a so-called linear economy in contrast to the circular economy. Linear economy, here is a diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and if you go to the website of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you will find much more information on the circular economy. So a linear economy just means we start with we take resources, natural resources, oil, gas, so the fossil fuels, but also mineral resources. And this mining process actually produces also waste. So wastewater, for example, or solid waste and things like that, or also air pollution. This is this part here. But then, and we, of course, we use fossil fuels to mine these resources. And then the next step, we make products from these resources. Again, we use fossil fuels, typically at least. And these production processes also usually yield waste, air pollution, water pollution, and things like that. And then consumers use these products, and after some time, they dispose of these products. And part of these products today is recycled, or to be more precise, it's usually downcycled. So the products resulting from recycling processes are usually not always comparable to the original products. And but most of these old products then disappear in waste. Some of them are incinerated, whatever. And this again, of course, uses fossil fuels to transport, for waste management, to transport the commodities to the dump sites and so on. So that's a linear economy: take, make, dispose. It's one direction, this way. And at each stage, we produce waste, and at each stage, we use natural resources. And the interesting thing is that this linear economy has been quite successful in terms of economic growth since the times of the industrialization some 300 years ago. And it helped, of course, to produce food for a growing population. So without this market economies based on this linear economy model, we could not have sustained such a large population. But it's important to understand that this linear economy makes extensive use of natural resources, fossil fuels also, and it also puts this waste, dumps this waste into the environment. So we use this environment on both sides. We take resources from the environment and we dispose of old and used commodities and some pollution into the environment. And for many years, the environment has accepted this task, has delivered, and it served basically as a supplier of resources and as a receiver of waste. No complaints from part of the environment. However, things changed, and at least from the 1960s, it already happened earlier, to tell the truth, but probably due to a rising income, people became more interested in environmental issues. And so from the 1960s, all kinds of air, water, and soil pollution became visible. And so just think about what we have right now: plastic pollution, nanoplastics appearing in the food chain. We have all this greenhouse gassing accelerating the climate change. And we have air, soil, and water pollution in many parts of the world. And people are becoming aware of this situation. So here are just a few pictures which I have taken myself. It was 10 years ago. Hopefully it's different today. It was in South India, close to Bengaluru, a dump site, a buffer water stream, a groundwater stream. You can imagine what is going to happen. Here is a picture from Greenpeace. Here, plastic waste in the oceans. So it's current picture, of course. Then if you look at global carbon dioxide emissions, So you see there basically it's always going upwards. Despite all the efforts that we have in terms of Kyoto Protocol or Paris climate negotiations and so on, it's always going upwards. You see some kinks here, but it's always associated with economic effects. So in 2008, 2009, we had the financial crisis, and the financial crisis helped to bring down carbon dioxide emissions. And if you continue here, 2020, 21, then we will probably see another decline due to Corona. So it's only this economic effects, because Corona slowed down economic activities, that we have a slowing of these global carbon dioxide emissions. So it's tricky to do. So the linear economy has basically used here the capacity of the environment to digest or assimilate various kinds of waste. And as I mentioned before, the environment has achieved this goal for a couple of 100 years. And but right now we are realizing that we tend to exceed this assimilative capacity. And this depends, of course, on the local situation. In a cold climate, this may be different than, for example, in the tropical area. And the consequence is that we need more and more efforts to clean up the environment in order to protect humans, animals, and plants. So you know how we calculate the GDP, gross domestic product, and all the efforts to clean up the environment are counted as positive. But of course, it's not really true, because it just means that we are cleaning up the environment. And this pollution of the environment should not have happened before. And the point is also that in some areas, there's a risk of lasting environmental damages if we don't act now. So this extends in particular to climate change. So there seems to be a tipping point, that at least what scientists tell us, that if we exceed this tipping point, then we are done for the next couple of 100 years. And I would always bring the example of Saxony, where I'm living right now, area of Dresden. 300 years ago, at the beginning of the industrialization, there were a lot of mining activities in the area. So they mined silver ore in particular. That's where Dresden, the Baroque buildings in Dresden are made from, more or less. And these mining activities at that time, they required a lot of wood. Coal was not used to this extent at that time. So they required wood for mining. They needed wood for melting the ore and all the other activities. And actually, Saxony was basically deforested at that time. So the area covered with forest was 0.3%. So right now, it's more than 30%. So it's 100 times more than what it used to be 100 years ago. But it took many, many years to regrow these forests. And actually, the concept of sustainability, one of the roots of this concept goes back to Saxony. Yeah, there was someone responsible for these mining activities, and he understood that we should not use more wood in a year which is regrowing in that year. And he put it down in a book, and he's referring to the concept of sustainability. So that's a background, though again, I think it's clear. Economic activities mean we take resources and we produce also waste. And the environment can only take this or assimilate this waste to a certain extent. So now let me come to the circular economy. What does it mean? And I would like to start with the academic concept. And then I will go to the practical perception of the circular economy. Well, the basic thing, of course, is, I mean, everybody understands that it does not make much sense first to produce waste to some extent, and then to take care of it to try to reduce pollution and to take away the harm to the environment or to the human health, for example. So the circular economy observes the basic functions of the environment in a sustainable way. Once more, The environment serves as a supplier of resources, as a receiver of waste, and as a direct provider of utility. So supply of resources, we should take care that we, whenever we understand that some resources are scarce, then we should think about alternatives, or at least we should try to save these resources in a sustainable way. The environment serves also as a receiver of waste, and we understand quite well right now that the assimilative capacity of the environment is limited, depending on the local situation, of course. So this means that we should not put too much waste into the environment, at least not more than the environment can assimilate. And the environment serves as a direct provider of utility. So nice views, mountains, lakes, and so on should not be destroyed. So this means what I have written down here: natural resources should be saved, assimilative capacity should not be exceeded, and so on. That's quite simple, actually. Well, it's understandable. And but what does it mean? So here's once more a picture. Here's the linear economy again. Once more, take, make, use, and dispose. And here we have a very simple picture of a circular economy. So we make, we use, then we try to reuse, and we remake, we recycle, and then we have this circular system. Of course, in reality, it is not that simple. Here's a little bit more complex picture from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There's the biological cycle, and here is a technical cycle. Let's just briefly go to the technical cycle. So we produce commodities. It's downward here. Here's some companies to produce a user, and after some time, there is a repair, bring it commodities directly back to the user. Then there is maintenance here, so with some intermediate step in a service provider, and we might have reuse possibilities. So the first user here sells this used product, and it's reused again to some extent. Refurbish, remanufacture is another option. And if all this is no longer possible, then the waste commodities are collected. There might be energy recovery, for example, by incinerating. And finally, inert substances, so substances which are no longer biologically or chemically active, they could be landfilled. And of course, this part should be as small as possible. Let's go. And now the simple question is how to do it, how to achieve it, how to implement a circular economy. It looks simple, but just think about one issue. Yeah, what is the interest of producers today who want to generate profit, who have to generate profits to some extent at least, to, for example, to extend the lifetime of their products? They will sell less, for sure. Yeah, so that's a critical issue which somehow interferes with our economic system, which is what I called earlier societal path dependencies. And it's not easy to redirect these societal path dependencies towards a circular economy. Okay, but step by step. Now let me first come to the practical concept of a circular economy. What would it mean in practice? So if we try to implement a circular economy, and you always have to understand that we have only limited information. We do not have enough information on the assimilative capacity of the environment. So it's only recently that we know something more about for example, the atmosphere. How much can how many tons of greenhouse gases can the atmosphere assimilate, or the oceans? And we still have only limited information. Until a couple of years ago, we didn't know about plastic waste in oceans or nanoplastics showing up in the food chain. So we still have just limited information on all these things. So there is one rule above all, and this means we should prevent waste whenever this is possible. We should try to make it possible, because so more waste we produce, so more waste stays in the environment. That's also a simple physical principle, the second law of thermodynamics. At least it will become very, very, very costly to collect all pieces of waste. Okay, so waste prevention is the priority goal, and it is indicated as priority goal in basically all environmental regulations extending to waste. Then in the next step in this simple waste hierarchy is reuse. So we should try to reuse commodities, old commodities. This is usually happening, for example, with used cars, big business used cars, or also with smartphones, for example. But look what's happening here. What's happening here is that in terms of used cars, of reusing used cars, for example, European Union is exporting, I think, 2 million used cars outside the European Union per year. And I think 40% of these old cars are going to developing countries. And we all know right now that these old cars contribute much to the air pollution in major cities in the developing world. So that's, of course, that's not reuse as we understand it in a circular economy. The same thing is happening with reuse of smartphones. So many old smartphones are declared as reusable and are exported to developing countries, such as Ghana, for example. I will show you a picture later what is happening with electronic equipment in Ghana, for example, but not only in Ghana. So once more, but coming back to the waste hierarchy, so if it is implemented in a reasonable way, the waste hierarchy for sure helps to not overextend the assimilative capacity of the environment. And of course, if we prevent waste, if we reuse and recycle, we also help to save limited resources. Yeah, that's also an important issue. So once more, just like we mentioned, because I have to come to it later, waste prevention is usually indicated as a priority goal. I think also in the Russian legislation on waste management, it appears. And it's important, the waste hierarchy is not only for the assimilative capacity of the environment, but also it also helps to save limited resources. I'm emphasizing that because we will see later that there's a huge discrepancy between what is written in environmental regulations and what is happening in practice all over the world. So now, how could waste be prevented? There is, for example, of course, reuse. I mentioned it already, if it is done in a reasonable way. Yeah, of course, reusing old cars, let's say in Germany, is certainly meaningful. Could also export old cars, but one has to be careful what is happening with these old cars. Very important are so-called designs for environment. So design for environment basically means that producers produce products which are particularly environmentally friendly. So, for example, which are designed in a way that they can easily be disassembled after the consumption phase, or that they are designed in a way such they don't use hazardous materials, as, for example, as lead or other, I don't know what else is used in smartphones. Smartphones, for example, there are more than 80 elements are included in the production of a smartphone. So it's quite difficult to understand what's happening there. And designs for environment also mean that the product should be longer lasting and should allow an easy recovery of the resources used for production. And again, this also helps to save natural resources. So again, one important issue is design for environment and reuse. They could help to prevent waste. So now let me come to the important issue of implementing a circular economy. What should we do? What's happening to this extent? It is a critical issue. I told you before that if you look at a regular economy, then all these things, innovations and for example, management issues and using knowledge from natural sciences is functioning automatically. So why is it not like this in a circular economy? The first question that arises, is there an automatic development towards a circular economy? After all, we understand that environmental awareness seems to increase. Environmental seems to increase, and we could just recommend, so just let's wait. No, the environmental awareness, this just means that people become more concerned about the environment. The rising environmental awareness will lead to a circular economy sooner or later. Another position is that the industry is developing many innovative environmental commodities, and these technological innovations help to reduce all kinds of pollution. That's certainly true. And you may know that there are 3 countries, United States, Japan and Germany, who are the greatest exporters, largest exporters of environmental technologies. So again, you could say, so let companies do their job, do their business, and they will help to reduce the environmental pollutions. Actually, there is a philosophy of designing out waste. So some scientists coming from this corner of industrial ecology, they are convinced that it is possible to design out waste. So to design commodities which do not lead to any waste. I'm a little bit skeptical about that, but that's a different issue. So now let me come to economy. Let me come to economy guidance, and let's briefly think about the chances for an automatic development towards a circular economy. There's an important concept you may have heard of, the environmental Kuznets curve. So Kuznets, of course, was a Russian, and I think he lived in the United States when this concept of the Kuznets curve here emerged. It was a different concept linking inequality of income distribution to GDP per capita at that time. Here we understand the environmental Kuznets curve as a relationship between environmental pollution and GDP per capita. So the question behind that is it true that with a rising GDP per capita, with increasing economic welfare, environmental pollution will go away just because people demand a clean environment? Now, as we are currently in the corona crisis, and we understand that hygienic measures and many things are important now, if we go back to some earlier pandemics, actually, at some point of time, people understood that the wastewater in the cities, in the major cities, so a couple of 100 years ago, was responsible for the spread of these diseases at that time, cholera, for example. And they demanded also the context of increasing economic welfare. They demanded that water supply should be regulated and should be in a way that it is no longer harmful to the people. So in this sense, here we observe actually the environmental Kuznets curve. So increasing welfare makes people here aware of the situation, and they start to ask for better environmental conditions. Okay? And in general, there are certain results, certain types of pollutions that decrease with an increasing GDP per capita. And for example, this is the case for sulfur dioxide emissions. Sulfur dioxide, if you know a little bit about it, it smells, and it's not very pleasant smell. And but it was not so long ago, you could smell it in many industrial regions, and also in GDR some 40 years ago. And so with increasing income, people started to complain about it, and this actually led to this decline of sulfur dioxide emissions. So what we observe here, what I mentioned before already, is if there is a kind of a feedback. So people understand that these things is harming my health. Sulfur dioxide emissions are harming my health, and I would like to lead a reasonable life. And so if they start to complain, and the governments sooner or later have to take care of these issues. A different issue is greenhouse gas emissions. Here is a picture of the European Union. So in contrast to global carbon dioxide emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union seem to decline. There are some issues in between, but in principle, they are declining. Here, the tricky thing is that most people or many people think that it's still an issue of the environmental Kuznets curve. But what's happening here is with greenhouse gas emissions, that it would not have happened, at least not to this extent, without the environmental regulations of the European Union. The European Union more or less forced member states to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. The reason why individuals are probably much more hesitant to ask for these things is because it's too far away for them. Yeah. So what can you do as an individual to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? It's zero. There's zero effect. Even Germany contributes about 2% to global greenhouse gas emissions. So even if you shut down everything and if you stop breathing, it will not affect the climate, will not impact climate change. So without this force from environmental regulations of the European Union, probably not much would have happened. And it is like this, unfortunately, in many parts of the world. Although we basically all understand what's going to happen. If you don't limit global warming, then there will be disastrous effects. Not for our lives, maybe not for the lives of our children, but they will come sooner or later. And there are already first signals to this extent. I told you at the beginning that yesterday in Germany we had 21 degrees plus. And I remember very well when I was a child, 1st of November, we usually had snow. But so there are some differences which are happening. So what is important now, that's what I would like to tell you, is that this environmental awareness may rise, but what's also important is this feedback. People must know, they must understand that if I do something, then there is a direct feedback. Okay, so if I don't put out wastewater anymore in the streets, then I understand that this may also affect my health in a positive way. So the direct feedback, and this, in this sense, the environmental Kuznets curve works. But if you don't have this direct feedback, then it's getting much more complicated in this context. And this leads us to the tragedy of the commons and prisoners dilemma, which I think you are more or less familiar. And these environmental commodities have characteristics of public commodities. So if anyone provides these commodities, then they are available for everybody else. And this means that at the same time that everyone can just lean back and wait for somebody else doing it. So we in Germany, for example, we just could lay back and wait till others are caring for global warming. Then we could also profit from it. This is not happening in Germany, and it's also important because we want to leading the process also, this change process. And if we, as a comparatively rich country, are not going in this direction, then who else should do it? So, and these two mechanisms, tragedy of the commons and prisoners dilemma, more or less are just a consequence of this missing feedback. So if you don't feel this missing feedback, then you behave like it is indicated in these two mechanisms. These two mechanisms are very simple, easily understandable, but it's very, very, very difficult to get across them. Yeah, that is what experience tells us. So what I want to tell you is that economy guidance, so just waiting for the circular economy to happen, is not functioning, will not function. Okay. Just think about once more, let me come to climate change. We know that climate change, we need countries such as China, we need India, we need the United States, we need also Russia to this extent. And but all these countries, we have quite different local conditions. So environmental awareness, feedback mechanisms are different in all these countries. And so perhaps you understand the complexity of having a global policy for mitigating climate change, just because of these local conditions which are important. And even if we have a, let's say, if we have a mechanism such as certificates for greenhouse gas emissions, then we can have them in Germany, we can have them in the European Union, but let's say 50 euro for emitting a ton of carbon dioxide means something different in Germany in comparison to India. So how to do this? It's a challenging issue for sure. Now let me come to industrial ecology. Let me come to technology guidance. So so now we understand that economy guidance alone is not sufficient to implement a circular economy. Now let me come to technology guidance. So there are a couple of scientists, proponents of industrial ecology, which tell us that let's take technologies a leading role in this process. Actually, some of them say that economics is not very helpful in developing a circular economy. And we understand that environmental technologies are required for solving all kinds of issues. So we have designs for environments, DFEs. We have renewable energies, technologies. Recycling of waste is a big issue. There are many technologies regarding to recycling of waste. And there are all these digital technologies which are of use today in all these processes, also environmental processes. And just think about now online shopping or e-commerce and all these things which are also relevant for environmental issues. The tricky thing is that business companies have the necessary knowledge for developing these technologies. Now, of course, you might think we are talking about innovations. And we all learn in economics that companies use innovations for keeping a competitive edge or for achieving a competitive edge, competitive advantage. Yeah, that's why business companies are usually interested in innovations. But it is a little bit different for environmental innovations, for some of them at least, not for all, for some of them. There might be designs for environments, so design changes. It might be beneficial for environmental issues, but which consumers might not like. So design changes, for example, which are not accepted by customers. And customers, of course, are in the trap of the tragedy of the commons. Even if they are environmentally aware, they understand I should buy the new design, which is environmental beneficial. But why I, as a single consumer, I cannot change anything. So why should I do it? I will buy the cheaper product, and which is a little bit more environmentally harmful, but so what? Okay. So in this case, if producers are concerned about the demand for designs for environment, then they might hesitate to introduce it. So there are innovations. Consumers have some knowledge regarding these innovations, but they will not do it. This is an issue for corporate social responsibility. You understand that. But some producers will do it for sure. But even then, you have to check why they are doing it. There are some producers, and you probably know better than I, they just use these things, these designs for environment, to have a kind of a moral self how to express this, that they are now, yeah, they can use it as a, and say, okay, now I have done something very good, something very beneficial for the environment, and now I can go back to business as usual regarding all my other activities, and I can pollute the environment because I have done this one thing good for the environment. Yeah, moral self-licensing, that's what it's called. So you always, if you look at this CSR business, you have to check, or at least I think you should check whether it's moral self-licensing or what's really, or is it really true CSR? And so I just want to tell you that innovations, technological innovations in an environmental environment play a somewhat different role than in usual business environment. Then let me come to rebound effects, very famous issues. That so let's assume that what is usually not taken into account by engineers is that environmental technologies may impact the behavior of individuals, may affect the behavior of individuals. There are very nice examples. For example, we now have all these energy-saving lamps. But what's happening now, what we can observe, that more of these lamps are used and more of these lamps are switched on, and actually so that the potential of saving electric energy is reduced by, I think, 30–40%. Okay, and so households buy refrigerators, new refrigerators, which are energy saving, but what's usually happening is, often happening at least, that they're using the old refrigerator in the basement and they use it in addition to a new one. So energy consumption is not reduced at all. Actually, it is increasing. And if we observe, let's say, resource savings in innovations, in regular innovations in business companies, for example, if they produce certain products using less resources, then they are usually doing it in order to save costs, which is, of course, legitimate, no doubt about that. They are reducing production costs, but one important reason why they want to do it is they want to stimulate demand. And more demand means more resources. So it's also, again, a kind of a rebound effect. Okay? And that's what I already mentioned, that past good deeds can liberate individuals to engage in other more problematic behaviors. Just let me give you another example. In Germany, we have this deposit system for one-way drinks packaging. So in particular, one-way plastic bottles. So whenever you buy a drink in a plastic bottle in Germany, you have to pay a deposit fee, which is some 25 euro cents per bottle. And it's not much money for most German households, but what's happening is that 98% of the empty bottles are returned to collect the deposit fee. So you get back the deposit fee when you return the empty bottle. 98% are returned, 2% disappear. Just let me tell you that this 2% mean 400 million bottles. So 400 million bottles are not returned, they disappear somewhere. Anyway, so but another question arises, why are German households so concerned with returning the old bottles? So take Austria, for example, Austria, a neighboring country. Austrians are for sure not less environmentally aware than Germans. Austrians, they do not have a deposit system. And the households there return about 70% of all old plastic bottles. So only 70% in comparison to 98% in Germany. So why is this happening, this difference? Is it due to the money, the 25 euro cents per bottle? As I told you, this is not money which is doesn't have an effect on the budget of most German households, or is it simply past good deed? So households are returning the empty bottles just to license themselves for doing other things. For example, to buy more drinks in plastic bottles. Yeah? So you're returning the old plastic bottles, and then you feel good, and then you say, okay, I did that, and then so I can buy more drinks in plastic bottles. Yeah, and you produce more waste, and we know that the more waste we produce, the more stays in the environment. So this is what we call a psychological bath dependence, societal bath dependence, or a psychological rebound effect, whatever we call it. Yeah? Interesting things. So psychology plays a big role in all these things. Let me briefly come to bath dependencies. We all have, if we rely on technological, environmental technologies, we usually have bath dependencies. So once you install a waste management system in a city, then there's a bath dependencies, because whenever you want to extend this system, you have to make it somehow compatible to the existing systems. Otherwise, it's becoming too expensive. So we have lock-in effects. But usually you don't know whether the systems you have right away is the right one. And if you are locked in, it can take 10 years or last longer than 10 years until you are in the mood and you have some money for changing the system. And another thing is, which is very tricky, I told you, or I indicated at the beginning already, that we have difficulties with prevention of waste. And so it's usually written in all kinds of regulations, but it does not happen. It does not happen really in most countries. It probably has something to do with the perception of waste, of what waste is. When I was a child, long time ago, so waste actually disappeared whenever we put it to a dump site. Then waste was prevented, waste was reduced, whatever. Now in later years, waste disappeared, waste was prevented when you put it into the waste bin. And nowadays, I think many people think waste is prevented when it is recycled. Okay, so there is a certain perception of waste, which is kind of a societal bath dependence, which makes difficulties. And right now we have difficulties with the perception of waste prevention, because many people here believe once waste is recycled, it is prevented. But again, that's not true, because when you produce waste that is not really needed, then you use scarce resources, and part of the waste ends up in the environment. So let me once again come back to this issue that I indicated already, to some extent at least, that in difference to a regular economy, innovations, so technological innovations in the sense of designs for environment, are not always in the interest of business companies, because they risk, or they think they risk to lose part of their customers. And so there is a tricky issue, because these designs for environment would be needed for a circular economy in order to save resources, to prevent waste, but they are not in the business interests of producers. And then, of course, if you only have technology guidance and let only and have only the interest of business companies, then these DFEs would not happen. Yeah, why should companies risk their demand and risk profits, risk income, risk revenue, if they introduce such a design for environment? The tricky thing is that the governments can ask for a design for environment, but business companies have the knowledge, not the public authorities, typically. Now let me come to an issue which is not in the main line of this lecture, but which is interesting for other reasons. So if we look at the countries which are struggling with circular economy, which are adopting circular economy strategies, which are trying to implement a circular economy, then we come upon a very interesting hierarchy of circular economy leaders and circular economy follows. Of course, as an economist, it's very interesting to figure out why is this happening. So why are some countries here faster than others? What are the reasons? And that's really interesting, and it also has also a very interesting economic background. So there are a couple of countries which quite early adopted circular economy strategies. There's surprisingly China, at least for the last 20 years, more or less. There's Germany also for 20, maybe already 30 years, and there are various other countries in the European Union and beyond. So countries which adopted circular economy strategies. And there are many more countries which are still struggling with the first attempts of a circular economy. There is Russia. There are these countries, there's India, and there are many, many, many other countries. And there are countries in between. United States, for example. Again, quite surprising. United States are not leading the process towards a circular economy. They are not really a follower, but they are not a leading company. So a question is for an economist, what are possible reasons for this hierarchical structure? Are they these reasons? Can these reasons be found in the situation, in the framework conditions of the countries? Or are there strategic reasons behind that? Let me first come to the leaders. And let me first come to a few characteristics of a country which might play a role, whether to adopt early circular economy strategies or not. And for sure, as a circular economy has a lot to do with waste, not only, but a lot to do with waste and with natural resources. Of course, the availability of land for landfilling waste, for hiding waste, is certainly an important factor. And the abundance of natural resources is also an important factor in this context. Now, if you look at Germany, we don't have much land for landfilling. So it's almost impossible to open new dump sites in Germany right now. So you can only dump waste which is biologically and chemically inert, inactive. And we don't have natural resources. We only have a little bit of coal, but now, as you may know, we decided to give up or to close down all coal power stations, for example, the next couple of years. So basically, we don't have any natural resources in this context. And it's similar to China to some extent. China, it's of course, China does have natural resources, but not all of them are open, can be mined right now. And China also has many urban centers, many big urban agglomerations, and not enough space for handling waste, for dumping waste. So there's a similar issue. And then we have, of course, environmental awareness does play a role in this context. And environmental awareness seems to be related to GDP per capita via these environmental Kuznets curves in a quite general sense. We understand already that this does not necessarily mean that with increasing incomes, all environmental issues will disappear. There's this feedback issue, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, so this also plays a role, so availability of land, availability of resources, or abundance of natural resources, and the level of environmental awareness. But then there's another issue, the strategic positioning of a country. So usually we have the early mover principle. You know that from innovations. Innovations here, all kinds of innovations. Usually it's better to be the early mover and then to use these innovations for producing innovative products and selling them on the global markets. This could also extend to or refer to environmental technologies, of course, for sure. So for Germany, for example, it is a clear positioning of the government that environmental technologies should be developed also for export. So we are developing, producing our windmills 20 years ago, we produced and developed photovoltaic modules. Unfortunately, now then the Chinese companies here produced also very good photovoltaic modules and flooded the German markets. In some years, more than 70% of photovoltaic modules installed in Germany came from countries such as China and Japan, Korea also. So it's also sometimes a tricky issue. But anyway, it could be a strategic positioning of a country to be an early mover. So Germany right now tries, for example, to be an early mover for e-mobility. Whether it is successful or not is a different issue, but at least that's one of the strategic goals of the country. Okay, that's a regular picture, yeah? Early mover, you know that from the Porter hypothesis, and I don't know what. But then now in environmental technologies, again, or in the circular economy business, we also have the positioning of a late mover. Quite interesting. As a late mover, so you let the others go ahead. In some cases, all this environmental business here means additional costs for companies. So it means, so let them go ahead. They have higher costs for producing their products. And this puts me in a very good position because I still can sell my products at a lower price. So there's a late mover advantage. In addition to that, later, of course, I can profit from the experience of the others. Yeah, that's also a very interesting position, which comes in from the special properties of these environmental technologies for this design for environments, which are not always profitable for business companies. Okay, so that's the situation here right now, the hierarchy of leaders and followers. And as I mentioned already, that there is this crucial difference between innovations in the regular economic context and in an environmental context. That's what you should understand, that we cannot continue with a circular economy in a regular economy. So many people are telling that and are writing that, but it's not true. So the challenge really is to stay, of course, in a market system, because market system has many, many advantages. Yeah, I don't want to go into that right now, but to somehow redirect the desired above dependencies in a way that we can handle circular economy strategies. And I can tell you that is not an easy thing to do. So now let me come to some environmental regulations. This you can check yourself. Just go through environmental regulations in Russia. Just go through environmental regulations in the European Union and elsewhere. You will always find some keywords. And I just want to mention them and explain them a little bit. So if you go to the waste directives of the European Union, there is a concept which you may know, extended producer responsibility. So it's not social producer responsibility, it's extended producer responsibility. And it means that producers are responsible for their products, not only during the lifetime of the product, but also after the lifetime. So in practical terms, this means producers should be responsible for their products already when they are designing the product. They should design the product that it can be reused, that it can be longer used, and it can be more easily be recycled. That's extended producer responsibility. Then what you find in the waste directive of the European Union is prevention of waste as a priority of waste management. I mentioned that already. And what you usually find in all these kinds of regulation is the polluter-based principle. It says, and it's understandable, that those companies, those individuals who are responsible for some kind of pollution, they should pay for handling this pollution. Yeah, it's fair principle, everybody understands it. But I just want to ask you a simple question. Who is the polluter? Is the polluter the company who produces the products? Or is the polluter the consumers who demand certain products, although they know they are better ones in an environmental sense? So who is the polluter, really? I just want to indicate that it's easy to ask this question, but it's not always easy to provide a reasonable answer. If you go to directive of the European on waste electrical and electronic equipment, so we're talking about smartphones, laptops, for example, then what you usually find a reference to a product design. This means design for environment. So this product design should facilitate reuse, dismantling, and recovery of VEE. VEE is waste electronic and electric equipment, electric and electronic equipment. Moreover, this waste should be collected separately to minimize disposal of VEE in household waste. So we still observe many batteries, for example, in regular household waste, and even in Germany. And this means that these materials, these heavy metals, which are usually in these batteries, they tend to pollute soil and water, groundwater, if they end up in a dump site or in a treatment facility. And then again, we observe the polluter pays principle, not surprisingly, in this case. Finally, let me go to Russia. There's the last law, it's 89 of the Russian Federation on Industrial Waste and Municipal Solid Waste. So it also refers to the waste hierarchy. So it means waste prevention is the highest priority. Then as an important part of the legislation is referring to waste utilization. It means reuse, recycling, and recovery with certain targets. And there is also a reference to extended producer responsibility. The manufacturers of goods, including packaging, are obliged to take care of the waste or pay an environmental fee in accordance with the polluter pays principle. So in principle, the Russian legislation is not much different from the legislation elsewhere, at least regarding certain keywords. Now you must understand these are environmental regulations, and they of course are mandatory. They should be observed by companies and by individuals, by consumers, households, and so on. But again now, once it comes to this extended producer responsibility to the design of commodities, design for environments play a big role. But again, the knowledge is with the companies, not with these public authorities. And just think about this issue with the nitrous oxide emissions of German cars issue in the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah. So the public authorities usually don't have this information, at least not right away. So companies will only accept these DFEs if they are in their business interest. That's legitimate, of course, but what does it mean for implementing a circular economy? So now let me just briefly come. I see we have, okay, I think we have a couple of minutes. Will soon be few. Current experience. So I told you that we already have various circular economy strategies in a variety of countries. And it's not only in the last 2-3 years, it's been already for 20-30 years in Germany, for example. So if you look at the European Union and we take plastic waste, so in 2015, there were 30 million tons of plastic waste generated in the European Union. 17% of it were collected for reuse and recycling. 83% were lost. And God knows where. You can here see some details. And 57% are lost for landfilling and energy recovery. Textile waste is an increasing issue. Fast fashion. Yeah, fast fashion meant that using textiles, clothing increased dramatically over the last 20-30 years. Very typical problematic issue is that most of the textiles are produced in developing countries, so India, Bangladesh, and others. And they are consumed mostly in industrialized countries. So we have this separation of production and consumption. This means we in Germany, we usually don't care much about what's happening in the developing countries regarding these textiles. I was once in southern India. I was in a manufactory producing silk, coloring silk. And I probably could not survive for one day under this framework conditions. Maybe it was 10 years ago, but probably hopefully it's better today, but it's challenging. And again here, see that 80% of the produced textiles are lost. And the main challenges are, we have mixed fibers, we have hazardous substances, particularly during production. And mixed fibers, we also have these new technologies, these new technological textiles used, for example, in windmills. And it's very difficult to recycle them. These composed textiles, for example. So there are many issues which are not solved right now. And they're also producing huge amount of carbon dioxide emissions. See, the production of textiles generates about 13 to 35 tons of carbon dioxide per 1 ton of textiles. I already mentioned global carbon dioxide emissions. They keep on increasing. In Germany, we always think we are very environmentally concerned. So packaging waste in Germany increased by 19% in the last 20 years. Plastic packaging increased by 74%. Unbelievable. In Russia, we have the following situation. So municipal solid waste here is increasing, from 47 million tons to 45 million tons. And in terms of per capita, it's also increasing up to 373.6 kilogram per capita. It's still below the German numbers, but it's increasing. And the recycled quantity is still low. So it's less, it's 10% approximately, okay? So, and then we have the big issue of exporting plastic waste. You may have heard about what happened in China. So China stopped importing plastic waste 2 years ago, but before that, China, together with Hong Kong, so Hong Kong also imported plastic waste, but later re-exported it mostly to China. So all this part from here to here is mostly global exports of plastic waste to China, which stopped at the end of 2017 because of the Chinese ban. And you know that I don't know how many cities in China were just busy with recycling plastic waste under horrible circumstances. There is a video on YouTube, Plastic China, which I recommend to you to have a look at it, what it means, plastic recycling. Yeah, because plastics is usually, this used plastic is usually heavily contaminated. It means that there are lead and other heavy metals are ending up in the environment, in the soil, and in the groundwater of these cities. This is what I indicated already, recycling of electronic equipment in Ghana. So what is happening here is that old smartphones, for example, many old smartphones, which cannot be resold or are not reused in industrialized countries, end up in developing countries, and they recycle them. So recycling means they burn off the plastics to then get to the precious metals, to gold and whatever is contained in these old commodities. So you see, it's not very healthy, neither for the environment nor for human health, what is happening here. It's also a nice picture, which I found some 10 years ago in Vietnam. You see, it's a mixture of recycling and reuse. So here you see the guy is sitting here and guiding the mule And well, it's also kind of an innovation, but it's probably not kind of innovations we are looking for. So what we observe, so even after 20 or 30 years of the priority goal of waste prevention, it does not play much of a role in practice. Okay, we simply have to state that. DFE's designs for environment are of relevance only when it is in the business interests of the companies. But if it is in their business interest, then they usually do it to reduce costs in order to increase sales. And then we have rebound effects. Reusing old cars and old electronic equipment in developing countries is problematic regarding air pollution and recycling activities. When I first came to Russia, some, I think 28 years ago, there you could still see many old German cars in the streets of Moscow, for example. It's now been a long time ago, and Russians now are driving reasonable cars, new cars. But if you go to other countries in the CIS states, for example, Georgia, you can still find many old German cars, not only German cars, but from the car manufacturers of European Union, of Japan and Korea. And the problem is with these old cars is they are not maintained in a reasonable way. And this means they typically contribute to air pollution in the major cities in these areas. Now, the reason is that we have this society above dependencies in many countries, including Germany. Waste that is collected and perhaps recycled is considered as prevented waste, which is false for a couple of reasons. I mentioned it earlier. But of course, recycling is, you can always tell people we recycled that quantity of waste that we collected. And also in Russia, the quota is increasing, so recycling quotas should rise. And this, of course, is easy to tell the public that we are doing fine regarding the reducing waste, preventing waste. And funny thing is, of course, if you have waste management companies, which are typically also profit interested. It's also in Russia, you have these waste management companies which are here to generate profits. Is it in their interest to reduce waste? Not really. It is in their interest to recycle waste, because with the fees they collect, from the public and in terms of waste collection and so on, recycling can be profitable. But if recycling is profitable, the first thing you do as a waste management company, you try to extend recycling, not to reduce it and to prevent waste. So you see in what kind of society above dependencies we are in this context. And in addition to that, there are many regulations in the European Union and elsewhere which say that companies, it's a polluter-pays principle, that companies are in charge for collecting and recycling their old commodities. Okay, now think about car manufacturers. If a car manufacturer, Volkswagen, for example, here exports an old car outside the European Union, it does not have to collect and recycle these cars. Recycling, of course, is expensive in Germany. So, of course, there is an interest in exporting as many old cars as possible outside the European Union. The same thing is happening with old smartphones. If you, as a producer of smartphones, you are responsible for collecting and recycling these old smartphones, each old smartphone which is exported outside your country or outside the European Union need not be recycled under high costs. So this means that there's an interest, companies have an interest in exporting as many used old equipment as possible. So you see again this societal path dependencies, which are working, unfortunately, which are working in the wrong way in this context. Okay, now, in principle, we observe there are limited incentives for a design for environment for reasons that I explained. There's a lack of interest in waste prevention. The societal path dependencies. and vested interests of waste management companies. And there are preferences for recycling because many people, households, think or believe or are convinced that any waste that is recycled is prevented waste. Okay, and that's basic. For example, also the argumentation of companies such as Coca-Cola in Germany and elsewhere. They argue that we increase the share of our drinks in one-way packaging, in one-way plastic bottles in particular, because we in Germany, we have such a nice recycling system, such an efficient and nice recycling system that, and we as for Coca-Cola, we take care of collection and so on and so on. Yeah? I believe that Coca-Cola is eager to do that, but of course we understand that an additional amount of plastic bottles, drinks in plastic bottles, will lead to an additional amount of plastic bottles which stay in the environment. So the last part, the last short part, I will give you an example of a so-called integrated environmental policy, which could be used for a circular economy strategy. And I will use the case of holistic of packaging waste. So let me see, how much time do I have? Maybe a couple of minutes, Lena.
Sure.
Yeah. So these environmental policies are called integrated environmental policies, IEPs. They are based on this EPR principle. EPR means, again, producers are responsible for their products after the consumption phase and should thus think about the appropriate design of this product. And there are so-called additional constitutive elements of IEPs. First of all, the locality principle. The locality principle is that whenever you are interested in circular economy strategies, you have to observe local conditions. That's already a tricky issue because I told you that exporting environmental technologies is a big business for some countries, including Germany. But it does not necessarily mean that an environmental technology which is reasonable in Germany is also reasonable in, let's say, in a developing country. Okay, now that's a tricky issue. And the locality principle is in particular important for climate change policies. Yeah, we don't have a world government. So we have to convince all countries, all major countries, to participate in policies for climate change. But how to do it? There are these countries such as China and India who want to grow. It's understandable. I agree with that. Yeah, they say, you industrialist countries, you exploited natural resources for the last 200, 300 years. You produced enormous amounts of greenhouse gases. And now we as China, as India, we should step back and cut back our economic growth. Tricky issue. The second principle is integration of affected agents. You should always think about who are those people who are affected by a certain environmental issue. Who is the polluter? Is the polluter really only the production company? Or are the production companies not really dependent on their customers? And they behave in a certain way because they are afraid of the reaction of the customers? So if you want to set up a reasonable environmental policy, you should also integrate consumers if they are affected by this policy. And then these policy tools have to be linked. And so what consumers are doing should have an impact on what producers are doing. I will give you an example. So these IEPs are so-called holistic policies because they are trying to take account everything. And the goal is basically to approximate the characteristics of the market economy. And the market economy does exactly what I have written down here. There is locality principle, market economy. If the price of one commodity is changing, then this effect has on all agents who are somehow dealing with this product as consumer or as producer. And the policy tools are linked, so it has effect on all relevant parts of the economy. Now let me come as for an example briefly for an integrated environmental policy for packaging waste. So again, here are some numbers for the European Union. Kilogram packaging waste per inhabitant in 2017, so 70 kilograms packaging waste per person in the European Union. It's quite a lot, actually. There was some, yeah, you see that economic growth, of course, was stronger in this period of time. So there was some decoupling between economic growth and packaging waste, at least. But there was not really a prevention of packaging waste. So first of all, we could have some auxiliary regulations which help to arrive at a reasonable environmental policy. First of all, for example, we could prevent landfilling of chemically and or biologically active waste. Yeah, then it makes it more expensive to dump waste, because if you have to treat it. Second thing is state back requirements. So if, for example, if you buy a computer in a shop in Germany, you may leave the packaging in the shop. The shop has to take care of it, has to consign it for recycling or whatever. So it means additional costs for the shop. And then, of course, you may also limit international trade with packaging waste, in particular with developing countries. There's always this argument, international trade is based on one principle, it's comparative advantage. Yeah, that's one principle of international trade. And comparative advantage of developing countries is that they are perhaps less environmentally concerned than industrial countries. But of course, is it fair then to export waste, packaging waste to these countries? Yeah, I don't think so. So we really should try to limit these practices. Also, Germany is exporting some quantity of packaging waste and exported also plastic waste to China, for example, which was not a good thing. Unfortunately, China stopped this practice. So all these auxiliary regulations, they have one effect. They make it more expensive to have additional packaging. And the idea is to provide some stimulation to reduce packaging, so to prevent waste, to prevent packaging waste. Then we should have a collection system. I'll tell you why in a minute. And we should have, if possible, we should segregate waste at the source, because it reduces also costs for waste management and makes recycling easier. But if there are high collection rates of packaging, and if producers of packaging are responsible for collection and recycling, so they have to pay for it in one way or another, so more we collect from the consumers, the higher is the interest of the producers of packaging to reduce packaging, or for a design for environment, to reduce plastics, for example, by some other material. Okay, that's the goal of this collection system. And here you see the link between what consumers are doing and the impact on producers of packaging. That's the idea of these policies. So we have here this constitutive element 3. And so how to organize separation and collection? Well, it could be done on a laissez-faire principle, at least in countries with a high environmental awareness. So if there are some social norms, established social norms, so you do separate waste. That's a social norm in certain countries. And if you arrive at this social norm, then you can leave it to people. And people, more or less, at least to a large extent, will follow this social norm. Okay? And according to a locality principle, and to some extent, these consumers are integrated into the policy. And if you want, you may also set up a deposit system for some parts of waste. It is not reasonable to do it for all parts of waste, but for drinks packaging, I told you already. But here, I draw your attention to the issue of this, what's called moral self-licensing. That so if there's a risk that people are doing something just to license themselves, to free themselves, to liberate themselves, to behave not very environmentally beneficially in other contexts. And then we have the EPR systems. So it's also when you distribute packaging, then you need to license your material. So you have to announce that you are, let's say you're using 100 tons of paper or 100 tons of plastics, and you have to pay for that. And you have to license this package with a so-called compliance scheme. So compliance is a private company which is regulated by the government, but the only task is these compliance schemes have to take care of collection of licensed packaging and consign it to recycling. But now you understand that if you're a distributor of packaging, you have to pay for the packaging that you are going to use. The less you use, the less you have to pay. So there's an incentive to reduce packaging or to replace, let's say, plastic packaging by something else. That's a goal. And these compliance schemes, I don't have time and now to go into details here. They should be in competition in order to arrive at a reasonable outcome, which is reasonable for companies on the one hand and for the environment on the other hand. So in principle, we have the following system. So we have the distributors. They sell some products, including packaging, to consumers. And consumers, let's say there is laissez-faire principle, or there's technology guidance, and there are certain collection systems, it's kind of a technology guidance. And we have awareness raising in schools, education in schools, so we have a social norm for collection and things like that. They collect the old products, packaging in this case, and hopefully high collection rates, and they affect these fees which consumers, distributors have to pay to these compliance schemes. Okay, and the idea is once more that these license fees, they mean costs for the producers, and they can reduce these costs if they reduce packaging, or if they have a DFE, if they use less packaging, if they use refillable drinks containers, for example, and things like that. That's the flavor of these policies. Now it's a little bit more tricky than in this simple thing, but that's more or less is the issue of these policies. It's not easy to set up such a policy. So in Germany, we have rudimentary kinds of these policies, but they are not yet fully functioning because there are some links missing. I don't have time to go into details here, but this is an example of what it should be. It's difficult to do it, I understand that, and it may not be easy to establish such a policy, but in principle, I think that's what you have to do if you want to go in the direction of a circular economy. Well, summarizing, I hope that I made clear that we should use this path towards a circular economy. Otherwise, we simply have to pay enormous amounts of money. So in Germany, I think we pay each year about 7 billion of euros, 7 billion of euros just for taking care of the health problems associated with nitrous oxides emissions of cars in cities. Yeah, can you imagine what this amount means in other countries? And but I think I've been in many countries all over the world. I still believe that we have comparatively clean air in most cities in Germany, but already there it's extremely expensive to not take care of environmental pollution. So it takes away a large share of GDP. And if you are interested in further issues, then I'm sorry, but I have to direct you to my book, which appeared 2 days, actually not in 21, but actually 2 days ago, and which contains much more information on this exciting issue of a circular economy. So I hope I could direct your interest to this thing, to this challenging issue, circular economy, and hopefully there will be some time in Russia again when I can talk about this concept in more detail. Thanks for your attention and good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor Wismeth. Do we have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. I see only thanks in the chat and on Facebook. So, okay, thank you everyone for participating, and we are looking forward to seeing you at our other lecture, at our last lecture by Professor Dr. Rozhanskaya on the prospects of economic recession on November 6th. See you then.
Okay, then bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
You, bye.
Thank you. Bye.